Welcome back, everyone, to #Lawyered. Today, we have a very exciting episode all about immigration, a very interesting topic. With us today, we have Matthew Meyer, and we are going all into what the immigration system is in the United States as a whole, the top issue in immigration today, or one of the top issues, namely the situation with DACA and the recent Supreme Court ruling on that. And then lastly, we talk about a very sexy topic, passports, and the concept of passports for purchase. And really make sure to listen in on that because we have Ludacris involved. Yes, that Ludacris involved with the passport situation. Thanks so much, and buckle up. Hey everyone, welcome back. You have Andrea and Austin in studio, and our guest today, Matthew Myers, live over Skype. So Matthews, thank you so much for being here today, and welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, we are so excited to have you here today to untangle this Gordian knot that is immigration.
Happy to try to do it.
I have the utmost faith in you.
Yeah. Well, and you know, Andrea, you and I learned just even in our conversation, you know, with Matthew that even as lawyers, there's a lot that we don't know about this area. And
so absolutely.
Matthew's got a lot to share with us, and it's a lot of practical knowledge that people need to know about because it's such a polarizing issue.
Absolutely. But first, Matthew, we want the audience to get to know you a little bit better and the fact that you're extremely qualified to speak on this. So why don't you run us through your background a little bit? So tell us about your your education, my gosh, your education and how you got into the field of immigration.
Sure. Well, first off, I have birthright citizenship because I was born here. So I'm a U.S. citizen. To get that out of the way. Grew up in San Antonio, went to university at Austin College. It's a liberal arts school in Sherman, Texas. And then Baylor for law school. I did internships with Catholic Charities of Dallas, their immigration department, and then with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, offices of chief counsel, and at their field office in Irving, Texas, which is where they do the green card interviews, they root out fraud and those types of cases, citizenship interviews. So that was fun to see the other side. So that's how I got into immigration. Catholic Charities of Dallas was honestly where I fell in love. Morning, I would grab a cup of coffee, do consultations all morning in Spanish, getting to use the Spanish language that I developed over studying abroad in college and, learning Spanish throughout life. In the afternoon, we do the preparation of petitions and applications. So it was a good balance. And then, did externships and internships leading up to where I am now.
Fabulous. So clearly you're very qualified to speak on this subject. So let's just dive right into this with one of, the big money questions. So how is the immigration system set up in America today? Kind of give us a 30,000 foot overview, if you will.
Oh, well, I guess let me first say, I omitted this from my background. For most of the past decade, I've practiced immigration with a large international immigration law firm and recently started my own immigration practice, partnering with MW Law Firm. So that's just a little bit of background. I'm not just out of college or out of university law school.
You are very experienced. Thank you. Yeah.
So, let's go into a broad overview of our immigration system. I get the question a lot from family members, think that you're either a citizen or you're not. But there's a lot of different types of immigration statuses in between, being a visitor, never entering the United States, through citizenship, and it often takes several years, 10, 20 or longer, or sometimes you may never proceed towards citizenship as a foreign citizen. And so some of those pathways to secure immigration status broadly are family, employment-based, humanitarian, which is like asylum, refugee status. There are other programs which may or may not confer immigration status, like temporary protective status, which is granted discretionarily by the executive for countries such as El Salvador, who the country decided that we weren't going to require them to return home when they experienced significant hardship in their countries and there was natural disaster. And then, other programs that confer no legal status, for example, would be DACA.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, speaking of DACA, we're going to get into that. So I think that DACA is something that a lot of people either don't know about or have a lot of misconceptions about. So let's just break it down for those of us, I'm a lawyer. A lot of people aren't lawyers, right? For those people who aren't lawyers to understand. So what is DACA? Like literally, what does the word DACA stand for?
Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And I was thinking about this, and I think it might be interesting. You may not understand how this relates to DACA initially, but it might be interesting to play a game, which is you both have complete discretion over who gets removed from the United States. There are an estimated 12 million undocumented immigrants inside the United States, which are generally the priority. And since President Trump took office, at least in the first 3 years, there were 800,000 deportations. So that's about 267,000 per year. And that's not exclusively of the people who are already here. That's a lot of it is folks that are expeditedly removed or are not part of that 12 million estimate. So, So that's say 250,000. You can deport 250,000 of the 12 million. Who do you focus on?
Well, me personally, this might be really polarizing, but I would focus on people who maybe have been convicted of violent crimes, whether here or in their home states, right? I'm sorry if this sounds bad, but I don't want a child molester or a rapist running around my country, and if those people come here, I'd rather they leave. I also don't like American citizen rapists and child molesters, if we're going to be honest.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then I would maybe to add to it, if we were going to add another category, is if there are individuals who are not working, and I don't mean like stay-at-home mom, that kind of thing, but individuals who are just hanging out and just kind of here in the country without actually contributing to anything.
Okay. Yeah. And so I would say broadly, the way that I think about it is I would focus on criminals. Let's focus on criminals, spend the limited resources. We can only remove, 260,000 per year, assuming that Trump is doing his best to remove as many people as possible. So I would focus on criminals, and that's what President Obama did. He focused enforcement priorities on criminals, and 94% of the folks that were deported were criminals. And he deported more people than anyone before him. And so how he did that, coming back to DACA, is he, quote unquote, earmarked the good ones. When someone's in a class of individuals that's not an enforcement priority, which is, I think a lot of people would agree, the children who were brought over at a young age to the United States by their parents, who have attended school in the United States, and who have no serious criminal history, which are the DACA recipients. Sometimes President Trump says that they're criminals, but they expressly cannot have any serious criminality. I think a lot of people would agree that those are of a class of individuals that shouldn't be an enforcement priority. We should focus on criminals. We should focus, as Austin mentioned, on maybe people that are public charges, who are taking public benefits, who are not productive. If anything, the last people that we should really be going after are the people that qualify for DACA. And so when someone is placed in removal proceedings, in deportation proceedings, it's very expensive administratively. Tax dollars go into that. And if they're in a class of individuals that we're not focusing on removing, then the matter is administratively closed, or removal proceedings are canceled, or they're allowed to stay in the United States in a deferred action basis, or it's basically prosecutorial discretion, and they're allowed to apply for a work permit with which they can get a driver's license and come into society like a normal American would. Except that DACA confers no legal status, meaning that they're subject to removal at any time, and they can't really live their life like a normal American because they're in a limbo status. And it doesn't lead anywhere. It doesn't lead to permanent residency or citizenship. And so, so the way that the DACA program works is that an affirmative application has to be made with a filing fee of $495 that fully funds the program. So rather than spending tax dollars placing people in removal proceedings that we're not going to deport, we're making them pay for their work permits and for U.S. workers who are reviewing these applications. We're making sure that they have committed no serious criminality, and we're bringing these people who we're not going to remove from the United States into the light. And it's, in my opinion, I think it's a great way to effectively target whoever we're focusing on enforcement priorities. And so I think the misconceptions are that it confers legal status or that it's not in accordance with law. And the concept of deferred action has existed for a long time, and it is well established in immigration law. Memorializing it in the way that it is relatively novel, but like I said, as I explained, it's not conferring any legal status. So that's kind of my take on it.
So, Matthew, you mentioned this a second ago about the prosecutorial discretion, and I'm assuming you're talking about the government agents, we'll call it, the lawyers for the government that are deciding whether to bring removal, or more commonly referred to in nomenclature, deportation proceedings. Right. So is that a pretty broad discretion that those lawyers have for the government?
It is. It's the executive branch's power there. Right. The argument or the concern, which President Trump was part of, which was elected on, is that this is selective enforcement. It's not appropriate. But we're seeing this go on in many areas of the law. Criminal law, for example, where different areas are prioritized over others. Murder is treated more seriously than other things. And so what was kind of funny is I got a call because when President Trump was elected, he shortly thereafter conducted raids in the Austin area and targeted day labor areas where there were day laborers and taco stands, and removed 100 or a couple hundred individuals, and 55% were non-criminals. Mm-hmm. And so I got a call from a wealthy conservative woman who wanted me to help protect her illegal. And I said, "Oh, okay, you're illegal."
Interesting terminology there.
She said, "Look, he's never committed any crimes. There's got to be something that we can do." And I said, that is what President Obama did. He focused on criminals, and for people who had not committed any crimes, those weren't enforcement priorities. We could cancel removal proceedings. We could try to administratively close these cases. But, that was selective enforcement. That's what President Trump was talking about. And she said, "Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I support that." And I said, "Well, unfortunately, your friend is receiving the brunt of that." And I think hopefully you can see that that's not, really great for people like him who haven't committed any crimes. That with there being nothing that can be done.
And it seems like a terrible, inefficient use of federal resources. I mean, I really, again, don't want murderers and child molesters running around. So I would much rather they focus on that than someone who hasn't committed any crimes.
Yeah, well, I think of it as for every non-criminal that they remove, they could have removed a criminal. So,
wow.
Like I said, 12 million undocumented in the United States, and more people than that getting removed as well. And we're only, out of the 12 million, 260,000 per year. So.
Jeez. Oh, my gosh. So, speaking of DACA, circling back around to that, there was a case recently at the Supreme Court where DACA was challenged, was it not?
That's right. The University of California systems, among other lawsuits that were filed, but the University of California systems lawsuit is the one that made it all the way to the Supreme Court. The Trump administration, of course, during its campaign, vowed to rescind the DACA program, and did just that shortly after he took office. And after a series of injunctions making its way through the court up to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court found that the Trump administration didn't follow the Administrative Procedures Act in rescinding DACA, that they acted arbitrarily and capriciously in not considering all issues or a number of issues, including significant reliance interests of DACA recipients on the DACA program.
And so when you say that it was in large part due to the administrative method, that they didn't follow the correct administrative method, does that to you mean that the Supreme Court was saying, hey, we are going to go ahead and let DACA stay as it is and deny trying to rescind this based on a technicality, which means that it leaves the door open for future administration perhaps to come in, and if they follow the correct administrative procedures, to dissolve the DACA program. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, so they actually said that, that Clarence Thomas called them out in his dissent, saying that, kind of in a legal way, you chickened out by not commenting on the legality of the program. But they said that DACA could be rescinded, and the Trump administration is going to has said that they're going to rescind it again. And so what's interesting is that it was remanded back to DHS for further consideration.
Department of Homeland Security.
Yes, thank you. Department of Homeland Security. And they were directed to resume the DACA program. What had been ongoing were renewals of the DACA program, but initial applications were not being accepted, and immigration attorneys were waiting for the Department of Homeland Security to re-establish a process for new DACA applications. And some immigration attorneys were going ahead and filing initial DACA applications if they needed to, or because most immigration attorneys thought it was clear that they were going to have to resume processing of new DACA applications that they hadn't done since 2017. But what's kind of funny is the Department of Homeland Security came out and said, Supreme Court, we don't agree with your decision, but you're right. We're going to have to carefully consider this. And so while we are carefully considering this, we don't want to start accepting new applications for DACA because there's just a lot to think about here. And while we're engaging in these careful discussions and not resuming accepting new DACA applications, we're going to limit the approval of DACA extensions to 1 year rather than 2 years, because, oh man, there's just so much to think about here. So we don't want to rush it by accepting new DACA applications or giving people longer periods of DACA approval than we may rescind because there's those reliance interests. And so I was doing some research on this. Immigration, there's not a lot written about DHS's response to say that they're not going to review new DACA applications. Immigration attorneys, for the most part, are kind of waiting on are filing lawsuits, and we're waiting to see, because everyone understood the Supreme Court decision to mean you need to restart the DACA program, and the fact that DHS is just refusing to at least process new applications is interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah. So what you're telling, yeah, right. Well, and so what you're telling us basically is it's not black and white like everybody wants to think it is.
No, it's definitely not black and white. And I will say that the Trump administration isn't afraid of taking actions that may not be in accordance with law in terms of immigration, and they have been held in contempt for refusing to follow federal court orders. So I wouldn't be surprised if the same result happens here.
Well, so yeah, it looks like more immigration lawyers like you, Matthew, are going to be out there continuing to fight the good fight for us, I guess. So kind of switching gears a little bit, I think one thing that's important for our listeners to understand, because it definitely was something that you were able to educate Andrea and I on, is what the different status categories are under, what you can be classified as, whether it's a permanent resident, a citizen. We hear that term green card and work visa all the time. Could you kind of run us through some of those categories and explain to our listeners what exactly they mean?
Sure. So my area of focus and practice is employment-based immigration. But of course, I handle a certain amount of family-based immigration. Asylum is very complex, and so I don't typically handle that. But I know enough to be dangerous about really every area of immigration. And so U.S. immigration is broken up between non-immigrants, which are temporary residents in statuses that, employment-based immigration attorneys make, most of their money because they're petitioned or applied for in increments of 1, 2, 3 years generally, and each application requires proving that you fall under a visa classification that's defined by law from A to W. There are almost every letter has a different visa category, and with distinct legal elements and requirements. And you would think, well, with most letters being U.S. immigration categories, non-immigrant visa categories, and then some letters like H, there's H2A, H2B, H1B, H1B1, that must cover everyone in the world. Everyone's, there's a category for everyone. But most people don't qualify, and in immigration, it's square peg, square holes, round peg, round hole categories where, it may fit 70%, and that's good enough for preponderance of the evidence, but it doesn't readily fit. And so that's non-immigrants. And in the employment-based context, most people start as a non-immigrant because those visas can usually be obtained quicker than permanent residency, which is typically a higher legal requirement. Takes years to get to. In any case, it takes years to get to. And so non-immigrant is kind of the temporary visa, short term, before transitioning, if at all, to permanent residency. And in the family-based and asylum context, you mostly go straight to permanent residency from a temporary status or from abroad. And so permanent residents that's kind of the endpoint. Once you obtain permanent residency, there are a lot of people in the United States that never proceed towards citizenship. And the substantive legal work, other than applying for naturalization, applying for citizenship, once you get to permanent residency, it's renewed much in 10-year increments, much like a driver's license. You don't have to prove you qualify each time, but you do have to be careful about maintaining your status while a permanent resident. So getting to citizenship when there's no reason why not to is important.
So that brings up another question. So there is this myth, right? Or maybe it's just where I'm from, that all immigrants who come to the United States want to become American citizens. It's the dream. Give us the 2.5 kids, the golden retriever, the white picket fence, all that good stuff. Norman Rockwell come to life painting. Now, can you be a mythbuster for us and explain if that's actually true or not?
Sure. Yeah. Some people don't even want to be green card holders or permanent residents. They stay in a non-immigrant visa status for tax reasons and for estate tax reasons. Especially.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to say as my next question, why in the world not? I mean, I thought prior to COVID-19, that pretty blue passport got you almost anywhere. So now it gets you like nowhere. Sorry, guys.
Well, I mean, there's a growing number of people who are relinquishing or renouncing, affirmatively losing their U.S. citizenship because we're one of the few countries worldwide that imposes worldwide taxation on all income, regardless of source. And there are complex reporting requirements under FATCA for U.S. citizens residing abroad. So if you don't live in the United States and haven't, and you rarely go to the United States and visit, that's kind of a growing number of people are doing that, mostly for living reasons. You know, the burden is significant to maintain it if you're not using it. And so to go back to your question, so getting a permanent residency, and permanent residents and citizens have the obligations of, in terms of tax or otherwise. And so staying in non-immigrant status, you would still have tax obligations, but you can return to your home country at the end of your work assignment or your investment in the United States and time here. Some people, I had someone say, oh, my wife would never let us come to the United States. There's too many shootings. It's too dangerous.
Oh, gosh.
Where we are in Eastern Europe is much safer.
Wow.
Yeah. And so in terms of going from permanent residency to citizenship, there are some countries that don't allow their citizens to have dual citizenship, like India and China.
Oh, interesting.
That's a reason why if you don't want to lose your citizenship in your home country, you wouldn't proceed towards citizenship. But otherwise, permanent residents have all the responsibilities of a U.S. citizen, but they can't vote. And permanent residents, in certain cases, can be removed from the United States, whereas once you're a citizen, unless you obtain citizenship by fraud, we're stuck with you.
You're here for the long haul.
Yeah, so you can, in most cases, once you become a permanent resident, if it's marriage to a U.S. citizen, it's 3 years, but otherwise it's 5 years of residency in the United States before you can apply for citizenship. And under this administration especially, strongly recommend everyone. But even independent of that, if there's no reason why not to go, apply for citizenship.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, and Matthew, kind of transitioning a little bit, but it kind of related to what you're saying. I mean, we see a lot of international students come to the U.S. for schooling purposes, and as we've mentioned on the show before, and as we talked about in our pre-production meeting, ICE issued some guidelines here recently that with the online schooling that was going to be happening at universities, that they thought, well, then international students could no longer be using, I guess, their student visas, as I would refer to them as. Now, ICE rescinded that, but a question that we had for you was, do you think this is a concern for our international students in the future?
It's very hard to predict in the current environment what the administration is going to do on a daily basis. There have been about 13 major developments since COVID hit in immigration, and there's been an overall tightening, using the pandemic as an excuse to eliminate most of legal immigration processes, shut down U.S. embassies and consulates so new immigrants can't get visas. And they announced this, and I was surprised that they rescinded. What ICE did was basically they took back their protocols and regulations back to what it was pre-COVID. They weren't implementing anything new, except they were getting rid of the COVID accommodations to allow for international classes. And I'm glad that they went back on that. And we didn't have to wait for lawsuits and questions of the legality of that. I think maybe they did some research and thought they had a loser of a case, perhaps.
Wouldn't be surprised.
But universities, you may be surprised, but I think the figure maybe in terms of STEM graduate programs, I believe 80% are foreign nationals that fill those programs. It's 70% at least.
Wow.
That
it's
blows my mind.
Yeah,
Wow.
and so schools are, and also foreign nationals predominantly pay full tuition rate. They're not paying the in-state tuition.
Right.
So
Good point.
they're subsidizing, your and mine and everyone's education in the United States, and also, there's not a clear pathway once they finish school. There's not necessarily a visa for them. The Zoom, the person that invented or that created Zoom, the founder of Zoom, he was. Most professionals after college apply for an H-1B visa, and that's the only visa that they qualify for. But there's a limited number of those annually. We have caps on those visas for whatever reason. And so I think he was rejected 8 times, I think I was reading, in the lottery. And so there are these people that are attending university in the United States without a clear path to stay in the United States. So I think with this action in the current environment, foreign students are deciding to go to university in Europe or Canada or elsewhere just because of the uncertainty there.
Wow, that blows my mind because, look, at the end of the day, I always like having some good engineers and rocket scientists here in the U.S., whether they're from Turkey or whatever. Gosh.
I firmly believe that, our country has been very competitive and great because we get an influx of highly skilled immigrants on a relatively regular basis throughout our history, which keeps us innovative. Half the Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 companies, I think, were founded by immigrants or sons of immigrants, and it just keeps us competitive. And the brain drain. While it's great for the countries that people return to, while America is a great country and we can get these talented people investing in the United States, the misconception is that for every immigrant, they're taking a job. But all that I'm seeing in my practice is they're trying to invest money in the United States. Hundreds of thousands. I've got, because of one of the presidential proclamations, banning the L1 visa, I've literally got over $1 million waiting to be invested in the United States from clients whose cases are ongoing right now, who want to open businesses, hire U.S. workers. They anticipate hiring in the hundreds.
Wow.
And we're slowing the economic recovery. by banning them through the end of the year, which President Trump did, and down to every category of especially employment-based immigration, those are creating jobs. They're professional visas, so they're managing, other people, or there's countless studies and data that shows that immigrants create more jobs than they take.
That's really incredible. And what myth busting right there, right? Because that really turns the narrative on its head that immigrants take away jobs from Americans. So I think that's such an important takeaway for a lot of our listeners here.
Yeah, I mean, the short-sightedness of, we need to keep people out because we need to create jobs within. I mean, just that story you just shared right there, Matthew, obviously bust that up. And that's something our listeners and everybody needs to be aware of long-term, because it's better for our country if we're able to infuse our country with more of this investment money in these jobs.
Absolutely. So I am going to completely switch topics here, and let's talk about passports. Passports, it's such a sexy topic. Anyway, so I have heard a lot of stories about some American celebrities who are now going and magically obtaining passports for different countries. One example, you may ask, right? Well, you wouldn't, this, but our listeners may ask, is Ludacris. How is Ludacris magically obtaining passport and citizenship for, and I am going to butcher this country's name, I am so sorry, he has obtained Gabonese citizenship, I believe. Y'all, I'm so sorry if you're from there and I've mispronounced it. I'm not very good with language sometimes.
I think it's
so
Gabon,
tell us about that.
I don't know how to. Gabonese doesn't sound right, so I think you got it right.
All right, fingers crossed.
I looked into that. It looks like his wife is from Gabon, and so typically, in order to obtain citizenship in a country, you typically will start, if not a temporary resident, but as a permanent resident, and then after a period, typically years of residency in that country, you can obtain citizenship. Some countries have faster expedited processes that don't require the period of residency, and it's unclear from what I could read how Ludacris specifically obtained his citizenship. It looks like by presidential proclamation or legislative action that granted citizenship, because I don't believe that he was residing there.
That's crazy. All right, so last question on this sexy issue of passports. Can I just go buy a passport somewhere if I wanted citizenship of some random country? Can I do that?
Yeah, you basically can.
Well.
So popular area. So there are a limited number of countries that provide what's called direct citizenship by investment. And it's kind of a 1%er thing that people talk about. You have an extra credit card. You don't just have one credit card. Why limit yourself to one passport?
Why not?
Your current passport. Why limit yourself to one passport? And so the most common programs, there are 5 countries in the Caribbean that are effectively the cheapest. Typically around $250,000.
$250,000.
Which the argument for that is you might buy a vacation home. When you're tired of buying vacation homes, why not buy an extra passport?
Why not?
Celebrities, and I've worked with celebrities and billionaires and different individuals who follow this mentality. And some people use it as a basis to lose their U.S. citizenship. Some do not. Obtaining another citizenship as the basis to relinquish your U.S. citizenship is less pejoratively viewed as if you already had a citizenship and you renounced. So from start to finish with the Caribbean passport, I would say around $250,000. The actual contributions are sometimes as low as $100,000. So it could be less, but with expenses and government filing fees, it gets up to $250,000 even in those cases. And a passport can issue within 6 months. And most of them, all but one, I believe, don't require you to ever travel to those countries.
Wow.
Yeah, so you just get it in the mail.
I
Get your
mean,
passport in the mail. One
shoot.
requires you to spend 2 weeks in that country, which is Antigua and Barbuda. But yeah, the other popular programs where I've helped clients get citizenship are Malta and Cyprus, but those are in the millions of dollars. And the European Union, especially for Malta, because Malta is in the EU, has pushed back on what they call passport for sale programs. Because of a concern. Ireland had a program for a while until in the early 90s, they found out that they were giving passports to fertilizer farmers and horse farmers with ties to terrorist organizations.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
There's a political element there.
For sure.
The Caribbean and the Mediterranean, options. Turkey has a program now. They're very careful with the political nature of these programs, and their own citizens not liking that they're selling passports, because a lot of the time the feedback I've gone on 3 trips to the Caribbean to assist with these cases, although I have local counsel there, so I don't need to make the trips, but they were for special clients. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
Well, and I think that that's one of those things that we learned from you, is that you can actually buy a passport, and the capitalist in me thinks that that's a great idea for countries because it just provides some investment. Matthew, the thing that I think we want to close with for our audience is, Matthew, just for our listeners, Matthew is known as a bit of a fixer. So he gets put into complex situations where they've got problems with someone trying to get through their immigration status, and Matthew's the guy they call in because he's got a special set of skills. And there was one story you shared with us about your experience in Grenada, where you basically helped put in a new policy in that country for one portion of their immigration. If you could just give our listeners a little short version of that story.
Yeah, so Grenada is one of those islands in the Caribbean that I was mentioning. But the unique factor of all the direct citizenship by investment programs in the Caribbean, Grenada is the only country that has a treaty with the United States that creates a temporary investor visa that is attainable more easily than what people have heard of in terms of the EB-5 immigrant visa for immigrant investor visa. And so I had a client who was what's called a politically exposed person. He was in his home country arrested for protesting. And he says he wasn't even involved in the protests, but it was a political thing. And he needed to buy a Grenada passport to set up his U.S. immigration strategy. And so, knowing of the political issues, I flew down to Grenada, and within a few days, I networked my way to the, to a meeting with the chair, the vice chair of the citizenship agency in Grenada, who I went from, don't file, it's going to go in administrative black hole and we'll never get an answer, to, let's, go ahead and file it. We'll know the case. We'll earmark it. We understand it's, as long as you prove it was just protesting, we won't just close our eyes and never review it. And so I spoke with, a law firm there, and, I said, this is, in Cyprus and Malta, there's kind of an informal pre-approval process where we can, don't waste our time, because you're not going to get the investment or the money if you don't approve these cases. So, tell us up front if this is going to be an issue or not, because the law is not clear. We don't want to go through this whole process and then get everything refunded and you not get the investment and nobody's happy. And then, the reputation of the program's hurt. So we pushed through a new procedure in Grenada to basically provide for a pre-approval process and a pre-filing process, which was great for the client, of course, saving months to a year of administrative black hole, never knowing what's going on with the process, and potentially getting denied, having that pre-approval process in place.
Wow. Changing our policies in one Caribbean country at a time. The fixer for you, ladies and gentlemen. That is him.
The fixer.
Well, gosh, Matthew, thank you so much for being on today. I mean, you have provided a wealth of information and busted a lot of myths, I think, that are out there and circulating. So thank you so much again.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, Matthew. So, again, listen to the podcast. We'll have some information about Matthew there. And stay tuned here for our closing argument and update on the Amber Geiger situation. And we'll see you guys next time.
Bye, y'all. Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for listening to #Lawyer today. But wait, before you go, we want to make sure that you know where to find us on all the socials. So catch up with us on the audiovisual portion on YouTube. We have a #Lawyer channel there that we're very excited for you to take a look at if you want to put some faces to names. I know I love doing that. Make sure to follow us on our Instagrams, whether it be the #Lawyered Instagram or Austin's and my personal Instagrams. We check all three, so make sure to DM us or frankly leave comments on all of our latest posts to make sure that we're covering the topics that you guys are interested in. And if you have any questions or you're like, hey, I heard this in the news today, I think it's really interesting, I kind of want you and Austin to break it down for me and give the legal perspective so that I am well equipped at my next dinner party or Zoom cocktail hour, COVID and all that, to be able to discuss this with my friends. So again, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to rate and review the podcast on whatever platform that you're listening to. And we are so thankful that you're listening, and tune back in next week. Bye, y'all.
Today on Closing Arguments, Amber Geiger is back in the news. She's appealing her murder conviction, for which she was sentenced to 10 years in prison. As a recap, she had actually shot her neighbor in her neighbor's apartment, claiming that she thought it was her apartment she was walking into and acted in self-defense. On appeal, her lawyers are arguing that she should have never been charged with murder and in fact should have been charged with negligent homicide, a crime for which she could be sentenced to 6 months up to 2 years in prison. If she's successful on her appeal, she'll get a new punishment hearing, and her hopes are to lower her sentence. Stay tuned, look into that story, and we'll keep you updated as things develop.